weeks ago, two of my friends were telling me how they're going to start keeping bees. And I thought, yeah, that sounds really cool. I want to do that. And then they told me how much they're paying for their beehives and all their bee equipment. And I was like, holy cow, I'm not gonna do that. I mean, it's a lot of money. It's almost embarrassing. I don't even want to tell you how much they're spending. Because there's really no guarantee that you're gonna make any honey or the bees are even going to live a season. So anyway, I decided I'd build my own hive, and I decided to build what's referred to as a Kenyan style top bar hive. And the main reason for that is apparently it's more bee friendly, and also you produce more beeswax. And I use beeswax in my artwork. It's a medium referred to as encaustic, but it's primarily beeswax. So with this hive, my main goal is really not to spend a lot of money on the project. So I'm going to build the bulk of the hive with an old Formica countertop that I salvaged off of a job a few years ago, and it's just been hanging out in the shed. So let's go ahead and get started. Well, I've ripped a few of my parts, and you know, you can build these things a lot of different ways, and one of the things that I really wanted in my design was a viewing window. So what I decided to do was make two end pieces. So I'm basically making the hive, and then I'll attach it to a front, which will be sort of like the traditional 15 by 12 size. But I wanted to have these end pieces to build off of for the window. To find the angles for the end pieces, I started with a square that measures 13 inches by 12 inches. I've measured in 3/4 or 3 3/4 of an inch on each side at the bottom. And now I'm going to use a straight edge and go from 0 at the top of the corner of the square here, and at that line, and then I'll just draw a line. I'll use the sliding compound miter saw to cut along the line, and it turns out that it's right around a 17-degree angle. Before I attach the ends and start to build the hive, I'm going to trace them on another piece of plywood because I'll need 2 follower boards. Most people don't cut an angle at the top and bottom of the hive to match the angle at the ends, but I'm going to because I think it might make it a little bit easier to fit the door at the bottom. I'll attach the sides to the back with a little wood glue, a few nails, and some screws. The nails will help to hold the parts in place, but the real structural strength will come from the screws. Well, I think before I start working on the back of the hive that's going to have the viewing window, I'm going to drill the entrance holes. And so I've taken a look online. It looks like the center of the hive up 2 inches from the bottom, and then out 4 inches on either side of the center. Now I'm moving on to the window, and the way I'm going to go about it is attach a board at the bottom and the top, and I've got the 17-degree angle at the bottom and the top. And I'm going to notch out a little bit here and a little bit here and fill this area with plexiglass. So the next step is to bring this over to the table saw and cut a little notch in the top board and the bottom. I'll take a measurement for the plexiglass window, and it looks like it's about 5 3/4. I'll use the table saw to cut the plexiglass, but I'm going to turn the table saw blade around first, and that should help to prevent chipping and give me a cleaner cut. I sanded the edges of the plexiglass, just going in about 3/4 of an inch to get a better adhesion with the adhesive caulk. I want to try and clamp this plexiglass down and get a nice tight seam while the adhesive caulk sets up. So I've taken a piece of 1/4 inch plywood, which is a little bit smaller than the notch, and I'll put this in place, and then I'm going to put a few pieces of 1/2 inch plywood and screw them in to the sides of the hive, and that'll act kind of like a spring clamp. Alright, well, it's a new day and I'm moving on to the screen for the bottom of the hive, and I think you're supposed to use around 1/8 inch screen, but I couldn't find any at the hardware store, so I bought 1/4 inch gutter screening, and I'll double it up and just shift it a little bit, and that should give me about 1/8 of an inch gap. I was having a bit of a hard time lining up the gutter screening. No matter how many times I tried, I'd split the difference at this end of the hive, but by the time I got over here, the screening would line up exactly, giving me a 1/4 inch hole. So luckily I had a little bit of metal screening, so I got rid of the second coat of gutter screening and just put the metal screening over it, and I think that should be good enough. I've got another one of these odd pieces of plywood here in the shop, and I'm going to use this to make the door for the bottom of the hive. You need to close the hive up during the winter so the bees stay warmer and hopefully make it through the winter, and I'll have enough here to make a door for the window in the hive. The next step is to hinge the door for the window in the hive, and I'll have to trim it down a little bit. I had to do the same thing with the door at the bottom of the hive. I just finished putting the legs on the one side of the beehive. Basically, I wanted to figure out exactly what I was doing before I tried to film any of it. So now I'll turn the beehive around and we'll put the legs on the other side. I'm using a few old 2x4s for the legs, and I'm cutting them at 34¼ inches, and that's from the long point to the short point, and the angle is 22 degrees. I cut my first leg, and then I used that leg to mark all the cuts for the other 3 legs. I added this cleat to the side of the beehive, and I put this there to hold the top, and I've marked a line at the center, which is 7½. I'm using 2 2-inch long screws to hold the leg in place while I drill through the top of the leg with a 3/8 inch drill bit. And now I'll hammer a 4-inch long carriage bolt through the hole. Add a washer and a nut. Now I can remove the clamp and drill a hole through the bottom of the leg. On the bottom of the leg, I'll only need a 3-inch carriage bolt because I'm not going through double thickness plywood. I'm just going through the outside edge here. Well, I'm almost there, but there's still a couple things I need to do. And one is to build the top for the hive, and the next is probably the most important thing, and that's the top bars. And that's what the bees will build their brood nest on and the honeycombs on. Now, apparently the logic is that the brood nest top bars need to be 1.25 inches, and then the bars that the bees build their honeycomb on need to be 1.5 inches. So I guess the next step is to rip a few pieces of pine for the top bars. I'm just about halfway through with building all of the bars, and the first step was to rip the bars at 1.5 inches and 1.25 inches. I then cross cut the bars at 17 inches, And then I ripped some molding at 1/2 inch. I just took some scrap pine, ripped it out 1/2 inch, set the saw blade to 30 degrees, and then sent the pine through twice, giving the piece of molding this nice little point. And that's what the bees are going to build their comb off of. Now the next thing was something that I haven't seen done before, but it just made sense to me. I added a little block to the end of the bars, and that will keep the bar from shifting on top of the hive. I made this jig to help me center the piece of molding on the center of the bar, and also to give me even spacing between the end of the molding and the block. I finished making all the bars, and now I'm going to put beeswax on the bars, and that does two things really. The bees need that wax to start building their comb from, and also it gives the hive a familiar smell, and the bees are less likely to leave. Now this whole setup here, it's definitely a little bit over the top, but I've been thinking about it, and I really want to do it. It's a piece of aluminum that I wrapped around the stick, and it creates this trough to hold the molten beeswax. And I think it's going to work pretty good. This is great. It's working a lot better than I even expected. The only modification I had to do was put 2 pieces of wood on the griddle because the trough was opening up, because it's just aluminum foil. But so far, I'm almost done with all of the bars, and I think I've been working at it for not more than 5 minutes. I finished up with all the top bars, and now I'm ready to move on to the roof. But I'm sure some of you are a little concerned about the idea of using a griddle and beeswax in a wood shop. You know, I'm just being real careful. The griddle is on warm. It's just about 180 degrees, and same thing with the boiling pot there. And now that I've finished with the work, I'll bring the tools outside, let them cool off, and then I'll put them in storage. So yeah, it's something to be concerned about, but just work smart. I'm using a 1x6 for the ends of my roof, and I'll trace the top of the top bar, and I want to make sure that when I draw my roof line, I don't go below the top of the top bar. I'll measure the center, which is 10, and use a straight edge to connect the lines. I'll transfer the angle onto the fascia board and make this cut with the table saw. And I'll just check it real quick and make sure it fits the way I think it will. And that's good. So I'll add a little more bracing, and then I'll sheathe the roof. Well, I'm just about finished with the hive. I've got 1 coat of primer on the whole hive, but I'm going to want to get a couple of coats of paint because once the bees are in here, I really won't want to touch it. For the roof, I'll probably put a piece of aluminum on the roof, and I also want to try to figure out how to put this on a hinge, and I'll cover that on Tuesday when I do a recap. There'll be a link on the screen. And there's a couple other things that I didn't mention, and we'll just go through them real quick right now. These are all of the bars. They're upside down. You can see that I've got the beeswax on the end of the bar so the bees can build their comb off of it. And this is the bee feeder. And I got this from Philip Chandler. He's got a really good video on YouTube, and I'll put a link in the description. I just thought this was a really good design. The follower boards. Remember I mentioned these in the beginning of the video. I'll talk a little bit more about these in the recap. But let's put the feeder in the hive just because I thought that was a really good design, and I want to show you the way it looks. This is just a board with 2 holes cut out, and the bees eat a mixture of sugar water, and they just fit into those holes. And the reason for this is you're basically trying not to disturb the bees. So then you have your follower board, and I still need to drill a hole in the follower board, and this comes up tight against this door, and then all of your bee bars are in place. And the idea here is that you can lift the lid off and change the feed without disturbing the hive. And I guess that's about it. Please leave a comment, especially if you have any questions, or if I'm doing something that you think is wrong, I'd love to know, because for me this is really a learning experience. I'm hoping that I'll be able to get some beeswax. Maybe I can use that in my artwork. And it'll be a lot of fun if we get some honey. I know the kids are really excited about this project. Please subscribe and like me on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you on Tuesday.